Hello everyone, this is Darion of GNB Productions, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Deadpool video game. The Deadpool video game released in June 2013 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. The game centers around the titular psychotic fourth wall breaking mercenary in the midst of making his very own video game, which centers around him in said game taking on the evil Mr. Sinister, as well as dicking around with the X-Men a bit, and just generally giving a fat old fuck you to the developers at High Moon Studios. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you know that I love Deadpool, and this video game was one of my first introductions to the character. The over-the-top goofiness and raunchy style of humor was such a breath of fresh air to me compared to other comic book heroes. In the years since I've played the game and read the comics, my stance on a lot of what this game does has kinda changed. If you ask 10-year-old Darion what he thought of the game back then, he'd say it's the best thing ever. But since then, a good portion of this game doesn't really hold up that well in my opinion. Before we really dive into that stuff, let's go over the gameplay. This point I have can be classified as both a positive and a negative. You'll see why the further we go, but if there's one thing this game can be commemorated for, it's the fact that it has a lot of personality. From the opening 20 minutes of you dragging yourself across Wade's apartment, it does a decent job at introducing you to what kind of game this will end up being. For better or for worse. From collecting 2 trophies just for getting off your ass, attempting to drink your sorrows away, poking fun at the props used for the game, or comedically stretching out the censor bar for your own dick, this game certainly knows how to make a first impression. I honestly can't go too in-depth in how I feel about all the kind of stuff they pull with this game, because that has more to do with the writing and story, and I like to save that for when I'm done talking about all the gameplay stuff. But regardless, this stuff does do a good job at breaking up some of the gameplay flow to add in some unexpected bits of levity, and it does match the sort of eccentricness that the Deadpool character is known for, to a certain extent. I guess I'll talk about the biggest element of this game, that being the combat. The combat here for a Deadpool game is about as hectic, chaotic, and destructive as you could wish. The game has you face off hordes upon hordes of random soldiers, clones of Mr. Sinister, 1 or 2 X-Men, and whatever the fuck these things are. The game gives you 3 varying melee weapons, being Deadpool's katanas, 2 giant sledgehammers, and twin sais. And 4 gun weapons, you got your twin pistols, dual-wielding shotguns. I'm so sorry, I'm not a gun expert. I low-key forgot what these things were called. But you got 2 of those, and these futuristic laser blasters. They as well give you a vast assortment of flash and hand grenades, as well as bear traps and landmines. When it comes to the ballistic insanity that comes with Deadpool's fighting style in the comics, I think this game delivered greatly. The melee combat, while simple, works extremely well. The katanas offer a balanced flow when it comes to the combat, the sais offer for more slightly quicker attacks and movements, and the sledgehammers obviously provide much more powerful but slower attacks. But the gunplay is where all hell truly breaks loose. Firstly, if you mash the trigger button mid-combat or after a quick teleport, you'll do these cool gun combos that make the combat flow really well. Not to mention, they look cool as shit too. You upgrade all these weapons by obtaining these DP points from roaming around the levels or defeating enemies. This is why I say with the guns all hell breaks loose, because once you fully upgrade the damage and ammunition output, you will be plowing through enemies like a hot knife through butter. That's not to say it's piss easy or anything, because like I mentioned earlier, this game throws a whole army on top of your ass like every 5 minutes. Which raises the question, how do you make an interesting and challenging game centered around someone whose power is that they literally can't die? Well, it's quite simple. They limit how much damage you can take and give you a pretty big window before you can start healing. I would have preferred a closer approach to that of the Wolverine Origins tie-in game if I'm being honest, where the difficulty comes from how powerful the enemy is, rather than having it be just a basic health bar depletion, if that makes any sense. Like in that game, it took a lot for you to be killed, so to compensate, they had the enemies be almost as tough as you are. It made things more interesting and less basic, but that's primarily a nitpick for me. Otherwise, I think the game did the healing thing really well. Like I mentioned before, the game also gives you a teleporter that can help dodge and evade enemies' attacks, and this is something I'm rather mixed on. As an idea, having the dodge mechanic being Deadpool's teleporter is quite neat, but in execution, I feel like it's something that's too easy to use and abuse. This undoubtedly got me out of a ton of scraps, however, but at the same time, I felt like a limiter for how much you could teleport couldn't have hurt. This isn't something that ruins the game for me or anything, but something I just feel a little meh about. Something else that's weird about it is that a quarter of the way through the game, you get this upgrade that allows you to teleport up ledges and stuff. The thing that's weird about it is that after acquiring it, you really have no real use for it anywhere else in the game. And I think it was some wasted potential, as it could have provided some decent amount of replay value. Another thing to do with the combat is the game's momentum system. What this basically is during combat, the more enemies you kill, the more these little bars on the side fill up. And once full, you can execute a super cool move. I have nothing much to say about this other than it just kicks ass. You have varying different moves and techniques you can pull with each of the respective weapons you have acquired. From making a spinning death wheel with the giant sledgehammers, turning into a Beyblade with your katanas, or my personal favorite, locking onto every nearby enemy and shaking the fuck out of them with your sai until they drop dead. Or just unleash an endless amount of bullets among the nearby enemies. Just a lot of really cool shit. There are also a plethora of enemies that have big-ass guns, and once they're defeated, you can take their weapon as your own for a bit, which, needless to say, is pretty fucking cool. Unfortunately, other than the final battle sequence, you won't find much use for the landmine and bear trap stuff. I feel like this could have been circumvented by them adding in just a few more stealth sections and whatnot, but maybe that's just me. The combat isn't really anything extravagant, but it is a great deal of fun. It does start to kind of lose its luster by the end, though. That mainly has to do with how the game structures itself level to level, which I'll elaborate on in just a bit. But like I said, once you get into the final battle sequence, you really get to flex and get creative with these trap placements, and it's disappointing that the game doesn't allow for stuff like this more often. Something this game does an amazing job at, however, is providing tons of creative and unique set pieces so as to break up a bit of the monotony. You got stuff like controlling a giant sentinel foot as you wreak havoc on Sinister's army, taking over a helicopter and wreaking havoc on Sinister's army, using a sentinel arm to wreak havoc on Sinister's army. Hold on, wait a minute. Regardless, the game does a decent job at providing a lot of these fun moments to break up the gameplay a bit. The combat is simple, but also really fun. I feel like it's lacking in a bit of pizzazz. Like maybe something that encourages keeping up combos and such would have been fun, but nevertheless, it was still enjoyable. The enemies you face in this game are kind of lame, I'm not gonna lie. As I mentioned, you face off against soldiers, Sinister clones, clones of a few X-Men, and whatever the hell these things are. If there's one thing that doesn't have a workaround, it's the pretty poor enemy variety. I would have appreciated just a few more guys than the ones I mentioned to at least try and keep stuff interesting. Like, you have these clones of Gambit that pop up every once in a while, and it just makes me wonder why the hell there aren't more X-Men clones we can fight. Throw in some Cyclops, Jubilee, Beast, or something to add a bit more flair. Because other than the schmucks I just mentioned, we have these really low-tier and uninteresting mutants as boss fights. Or at least I assume they're low-tier, because the game keeps presenting them as such. The game really could have used more time to provide some unique and interesting boss fights, because they basically amount to just shoot and stab a bunch and they're freaking dead. Which kinda sucks. Considering that Deadpool as a character doesn't have many locales or places specifically made for him, you'd wonder what kind of places you'd venture throughout the game. Well, it ranges from sewers, skyscrapers, underground caverns, but primarily, the game is set on the island of Genosha, which to me would have been a really cool and interesting place to have a game like this center around, if it weren't for the fact that a vast majority of the iconography looks so bland and samey. This is something that more so ties into the story, but it also feels like a missed opportunity to actually have the game put more of a light on how fucked the attack on Genosha was. The level design is very linear, which for the most part works. I just almost wish the game had a bit more going for it when it came to the levels, to make them stand out a bit more at least. Roaming around the ruins of Genosha is only really cool for a little while, same for the underground caverns and such. Maybe I'm just expecting too much, but the levels themselves all just felt pretty bland in my opinion. The graphics and art style for this game still hold up fairly well, I'd say. The cutscene animation and graphics hold up fairly well after 10 years. This game really nailed Deadpool's cartoonish mannerisms and movements. Everyone's design in this game is pretty top-notch. There really isn't much more I can say other than they nailed the look with these designs and animations. Despite only seeing it for brief moments, I'm glad that Deadpool's face looks pretty grotesque, more so than the movies at least. The game unfortunately doesn't have much going for it when it comes to its music. Maybe because the combat and stuff is so hectic I'm rarely paying attention to it, but it more often than not drowns out to just sounding like standard rock music. Which ain't bad, but I would have appreciated just a bit more, I guess. The game doesn't offer much content for you after you beat the story, except for these combat challenges. And they're fun. I already talked about combat, and these really are just more of that. They do provide a decent bit of challenge, though. If there's one thing that pissed me off for years, is that they don't allow you to use any of the costumes here in the main campaign. They got his X-Man outfit, the one with that big weird strap that always looked cool, and even the fucking X-Force one. Come on! The challenges basically put you in a gauntlet of enemies, and you have to last until a specific timer runs out, with the bronze, silver, and gold medallions increasing the time you have to survive. And like I said, this stuff is pretty challenging. Once you finish each of the 3 challenges, you'll then unlock an infinite mode, where there's no time limit and you'll have to last as long as you can. This is also where you'll be able to play in the alternate skins. Like I said, these are a good bit of fun. They really highlight just how insane the encounters in this game are, and they really keep you on your toes. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, for a minute, I struggled to talk about a bulk of what this game offers because the humor is such a huge part of it. So I guess I'll finally talk about the story. I kind of struggled to describe the overall plot for my intro, because while the story is embarrassingly simple, it's also all over the damn place. The story has a bit of a nonchalant vibe about itself, which feels like its biggest strength and weakness. I say it's a strength because it attributes to the game's really out there personality. You won't find many games that don't take themselves super seriously. And because of that, in some aspects, this game will feel like a breath of fresh air, but it's also a weakness because it results in what could have been a more engaging and fun storyline with Deadpool and the X-Men to just being shit happens. The comedy is what is at the forefront of this game, which is why I found it hard to discuss certain elements before getting to this point. The game takes every opportunity it can to acknowledge and poke fun at itself for being a video game, which is again a blessing and a curse, because yeah, this stuff will be fun to experience your first time through, but in my many replays, some of this stuff just felt so egregious. Yeah, some of this stuff works to break up the wall-to-wall explosive action, but the whole gag about budget constraints and whatnot is only funny for so long. Something to, I guess, praise about the writing is that in several moments they attempt to give you a rundown on certain characters and their history, but this is something that also bothers me because it carries on this nonchalant tone. All of this stuff doesn't really give you that deep of a background on their personality, history, or relationship with Deadpool. Again, maybe I'm expecting a bit too much, as it does make sense for it to be presented this way when it's being delivered through the eyes of Deadpool. But it also sucks that we don't get anything interesting on these descriptions besides the stuff we see from Deadpool. The story for this game just falls extremely flat, which in the grand scheme of things isn't the biggest deal, as that was never really the focus. But I look at all the stuff this game does with its story and see nothing but a big missed opportunity to have a story that, while not groundbreaking, is more interesting had the writers just given more of a shit. You know what, one of these days I might just fuck around and do a rewrite of this game's story just for the fun of it. But anyway, the attempts at humor that is sprinkled throughout the game doesn't do it any favors either. This game's humor is very much a product of its time. In saying that feels really weird considering that it only came out 10 years ago, but hopefully you'll see what I mean, as it's riddled with a bunch of lol random meme humor that just really doesn't hold up. Incredibly crass and over-the-top raunchiness that sometimes works but after a while just becomes annoying. When I first played this game as a 10-year-old, seeing a bunch of back-to-back ass and titties was the coolest thing ever. Now as a 20-year-old, yeah, I still enjoy some of it, but after a while I just couldn't give a shit. Alright, enough beating around it, let's talk characters. Which is going to be fairly simple, as no character in this game's story really has any depth to them. I've been holding off on venting about this, but in the years that I've been playing this game, the way Deadpool is written has done nothing but piss me off. Deadpool in this game is written to be portrayed as an over-the-top memey, uncaring, raunchy, and overall annoying asshole, and I can't stand it. Now, before anyone gets on my ass, yes, I'm aware these are parts of his character. I've been reading Deadpool comics, except a few from like the last 3 years, since I was 10. But that's the thing, these traits are only a part of his character, as they serve the more depressive, morally questionable, deeper parts of his character. Deadpool is oftentimes the textbook definition of a sad clown. He uses humor and jokes to distract from his frankly shitty life. I'm not saying this game needed to go headfirst into all that stuff, as it's just trying to be entertaining, but ignoring those deeper aspects of Wade Wilson's character ignores a large part of what makes this character interesting. I'm not trying to hype this stuff up like it's the Shakespeare of comics or anything, but when you bother to take the time and look into it, it's way more engaging than people give it credit for. It just irritates me because the writers deliberately went out of their way to make the interesting parts of Deadpool, his insanity, coping mechanisms, and his entire past be thrown away as one-off jokes. Which is even more sad considering the writer that got me into the series, Daniel Way, penned the story. Daniel Way in the last few recent years has had a few detractors saying that his run on Deadpool is what kickstarted the meme pool phenomena, and that's not untrue, but I don't know. I still enjoyed Daniel's take quite a bit. It's not like here where Deadpool's always an obnoxious douche 24/7. And as far as this game goes, and maybe I'm on the fattest dose of copium, but am I wrong for thinking that how this story turned out isn't entirely Daniel's fault? Maybe I'm wrong, but considering the stuff he's done with the character in the past, I can't sit here and think this mess was entirely his doing. Maybe some meddling from High Moon or Marvel for what they wanted the game to be. I don't know, maybe I'm just tripping. Anyway, yeah, for a game about Deadpool, the story unfortunately doesn't have many associations with the character or his lore. No side characters that revolve around him like Blind Al or Hydra Bob. Hell, the teleporter you use in this game was created by Weasel if I'm remembering correctly. What, no fun little reference to him? Yeah, the Deadpool part of the Deadpool game story is extremely lacking. The title character is an overly obnoxious, uncaring, and at times unfunny asshole. This story also makes Wade out to be just a fucking idiot. Yeah, he cracks jokes and shit at inopportune moments or doesn't take certain situations seriously, but he's not stupid. Yeah, Deadpool kinda sucks in this game. Yes, some of the antics do get a laugh out of me, but as a whole, this shit got grating real damn quick. The other characters in this story could very easily be replaced with cardboard cutouts, as they really add nothing of value. As far as the X-Men goes, we have Wolverine, Psylocke, Domino, and Rogue, and even though he's not really with the X-Men, we have Cable as well. Already, this may seem a bit random, but I do like this lineup of characters for a small little story like this. Domino says like one sentence. Psylocke doesn't say a damn word, I don't think. This game was my introduction to both of these characters, so for a few short years, the only impression I had of them was that they had fat, juicy, voluptuous asses and titties. That's fucking it, dude. And Wolverine does get a few lines, but ultimately the X-Men don't contribute much. Except for when Rogue gains Deadpool's abilities, which was pretty neat. She even gains the voices in Deadpool's head, which is kind of funny. This bit also annoys me because it just reminds me of the fact that he didn't say Rogue for any real reason, other than to make a dumb sex joke about it. I'm sorry, but Deadpool's BS just annoys me to no end. None of these characters have any kind of relationship or interesting connection to Deadpool. They really are just there, which especially sucks for those like Cable and Wolverine. Characters Deadpool has a ton of history with that this game isn't unaware about, but whenever they interact, there really is just nothing of value. The villains in this also exist. I was led to believe that Mr. Sinister was some lame D-rank Marvel Comics villain based on how much this story clowns on him, only to watch the 90s X-Men series and see, yeah, he's kinda cool. Anyway, this game doesn't do him any favors, which doesn't bother me, but I do wish the main villain would have been a little bit more interesting. Same goes for the henchmen they picked for him. Blockbuster, Arclight, Vertigo, all just exist. I don't know if I should even count them as separate characters, but this game made the smart decision, I feel, in bringing in Deadpool's voice boxes. These were probably the best utilized characters because they just allow for Deadpool to bounce off of someone else in interesting ways. The yellow box is the more silly one, and the white box is the more serious voice of reason. These were pretty fun, and the only noteworthy additions this game had. The voice acting in this game is pretty good. Everyone does a pretty solid job. This game is where Nolan North really gets to shine with his take on Deadpool. Even though there aren't that many, North has easily become the default Deadpool voice, at least for me. He's the one I always hear whenever I read the comics. He even gets to show his range by having him voice the two voice boxes as well. The three really have some fun chemistry throughout the game. If there's one nitpick I have about North's Deadpool, and this really has nothing to do with him, or this game rather, it's just that I'm desperately waiting for him to be given a more serious direction with the character. Whenever he voices the character, he's always given this slightly higher and energetic direction, which isn't bad by any means, but I just really want to see what Nolan would bring with some actually serious Deadpool moments. Just a nitpick from me, but overall, he does a great job. For the X-Men, we have the iconic Steve Blum as Wolverine, who does a fantastic job as always. Melissa Disney and Gwendolyn Yeo do a great job as Domino and Rogue respectively, for the little time they actually speak. I know Psylocke had like one line and I couldn't find the VA, but she sounded decent, I guess. Fred Tatasquire, I'm so sorry if I butchered these names by the way, also did a good job as Cable. Keith Ferguson also does a great job with Mr. Sinister. Just an all-around good cast this game has. Overall, the Deadpool game was kinda fun. I may have gotten a tad negative midway through, but even with the painfully simplistic and unfocused plot, very hit-or-miss humor, and poor characterization of the title character, this game was still a fun time. It purely aims to entertain, and for the most part, it succeeds. The combat is hectic and fun with the perfect amount of chaotic wackiness that the character is synonymous for. The game has a plethora of set pieces and wild gimmicks, which allows the game to have more of an identity and break up the wall-to-wall action encounters. But the story, writing, and overall humor really doesn't hold up. It just leaves me a tad disappointed, because what we have here had the potential to be more. It'll provide for a fun and unique experience, surely, but it also easily gets grating after a while. Overall, the Deadpool game, in my opinion, is pretty damn cool.
So, with all that said, if you agree or disagree with anything I've said in this video, let me know right down there in the comments below. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. This is Darion of GNB Productions, and take care.